Okay. Well, welcome to this session titled What State Policies Are Needed to Expand and Oversee Emerging School Models. We have a panel of legislators. Our first panelist is Alexis Calatayud. She is a Florida State Senator, and she has worked very closely on school choice legislation and actually has been the sponsor of some very recent and important bills in Florida that she's going to talk about. Our second panelist is Oklahoma Representative Chad Caldwell. Since Chad Caldwell has been in the legislature, he has worked on a number of important education reform initiatives there. And our third panelist is Nicholeen Peck, a representative from Utah. She also happens to be formerly a private school teacher and also a homeschool teacher. So she brings that perspective as well, along with her legislative experience. And then finally, we have Bob Wittke, a state representative from Wisconsin. Representative Wittke has also been a school board president in the Racine School District in Wisconsin. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to the legislators, starting with Senator Calatayud.
Good morning. A joy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Alexis Calatayud. I represent Southeast Miami-Dade in the Florida Senate. I'm entering my fourth year in that incredible honored position. Born and raised in Miami, the granddaughter of Cuban exiles and veterans of the Bay of Pigs, deeply committed to the idea that education is one of the only things that can't be taken from you, and that is transformational in the United States. My mission and goal in the legislature and through education policy is to advance generational upward mobility. And I think, as the superintendent mentioned in his opening comments, and I'm so eager for this panel to share, transformative education models are the only thing that in 2025 will be transformative to break the barriers of generational poverty. Excited for this conversation.
Do you want us to go ahead and you want us to do our introduction, or you want to launch right into it? And
Feel free to launch right into it.
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I can assure you that many of my teachers would have been shocked that they would have even allowed me on campus here. So thank you for having us. So I have to be honest, when Dan first sent me the topic that we were talking about, I kind of struggled with it quite a bit. Because I think this conversation about what policies are needed to help facilitate these emerging models, there's a kind of a fundamental contradiction that we have that kind of you take the policymakers' desire to direct or control versus systems that we know really thrive with less regulation. So I just got back. I got to spend a couple weeks in Estonia and in some of the Scandinavian countries looking at some of their education systems. And one of the things that we heard most often when talking to their school leaders was the importance of autonomy. They have a national curriculum, but there was a lot of autonomy in there. And so I think you see the same is true here with these alternative education models. We know that historically across the country, the models that have struggled are the ones that have been kind of choked out or been stifled by what I'll be generous with was and call well-intentioned regulations. But we know that those well-intentioned regulations really does have a way of stifling innovation and putting on handbrakes on potential progress. So what I think it sets up is this inherent battle that you have from the education providers' need for flexibility and autonomy versus the state's need to ensure quality and accountability, and of course, to protect taxpayer dollars. So if I can, I'll just kind of jump to the end, but essentially my message, what kind of policies do we need? I would tell you less is more. And I think that's the reminder and the struggle that we have from a legislative perspective. The first step is maybe sometimes overlooked. Legislators often look at, when we're writing a bill, you're looking at adding. I will tell you, I think the first thing we need to do is take a look at what existing policies does the state have that's actually restricting and inhibiting growth as it is? So I would tell you the first step that needs to be done in every state is just to ensure that we're removing those statutes that are already existing that restrict growth. Create a clear statutory authority. I think as we continue to evolve, we find that the framework we have for our existing models don't necessarily translate very well, and sometimes, like I said, don't allow for those other models. So to create those clear definitions, but to do so in a way that doesn't prohibit future innovation. And I think a lot of times without explicit language, without some of those definitions, you find that those models may really fall into kind of a regulatory gray area. Again, we can't just pick up the traditional regulatory box and move it over. And I don't know about your states, but the political winds never seem to be very far from this topic of education. So if you don't have explicit authorities and if you don't have clearly defined authorization, depending on who is, maybe who the governor is, who your education head and leadership is at the time, can really dictate kind of the openness and willingness for those education models. So Oklahoma uses a statewide authorizer. We've had a variety of different models. A couple years ago, we went to more of a statewide authorizer. We're kind of working through that process, but I think what we found, hopefully, the goal is that it will kind of more streamline the process. It'll help ensure consistency, but ultimately there will also be a focus and an emphasis on quality as well. We still have other avenues, but I think like you've seen maybe in other states such as like Arizona, I think ultimately you will find that the majority of our providers will move more through like the statewide authorizer. As you're deciding kind of what one of those models you go with, I think one of the things to consider is from an accountability and evaluation standpoint, do you want to go to more of a third party versus an internal evaluation? In Oklahoma, our statewide authorizer also plays a role in accountability. They do performance reviews, they do reauthorization, and each of our contracts have to include criteria in which effectiveness is measured. We want to make sure how they are doing. One of the things that I think we actually do well, and I'm happy to give you the link later on, or you can just look at our statewide charter school board. We have an interactive dashboard, and there's a lot of education data. Oftentimes it's not necessarily easily accessible or usable, but in this, actually you can find it pretty quickly on the website, but it compares both our traditional models to some of our alternative models, such as charters, looks at student populations, but also performance reviews, and it's a really interactive way, and so I would encourage you to certainly look at that. One of the things I think is somewhat unique that we've done, in 2024, we were one of the first states in the country to actually embed an Office of School Choice within our Department of Education. The goal in that is just to really help parents navigate those education options and help connect them with resources. Again, that's kind of in its infancy. We're getting ready to have a change in leadership of our State Department of Education, so we'll see kind of how that goes next. But I think that's a model. As parents, we know that parents want options. So this is an opportunity. How do we connect them with those options to really help them find that choice that is the best fit for their student? I think when you're talking about accountability, obviously the challenge is how do we tailor those to these new emerging models, to these alternative education options. Again, maybe it's looking at something that's competency-based as opposed to something seat-based or something like that. Obviously, don't talk about education very long before you talk about the funding and the dollars. So as we're looking at those policies, how do we ensure that maximum flexibility with your state dollars? How do you modernize existing formulas to allow those dollars to follow the students across those settings? So whether that's a part-time model or a hybrid model or something along those things. In Oklahoma, we have various choice programs. We have a private tax credit scholarship. We have a public tax credit scholarship. We have a scholarship for special needs students. So how do we work to ensure that that those funds are accessible? One of the things that we just went through is working on really determining what type of provider qualifies. And interestingly enough, to me, we had pressure on both sides of that conversation, kind of trying to restrict that a little bit. Again, making sure that you have a standard of quality, I think, in there. And then the last thing I would probably talk about as far as just as initial setup is just teacher certification. How do you give that and maintain that flexibility where you are? We know that just graduating from a college of education doesn't necessarily make you a better teacher. So how do we give those schools that flexibility? So I think Oklahoma's done some really quality things to kind of start that process. And the last thing I would say that everyone needs to do is it's important to define what success really looks like for you, because if we don't measure it, we don't know it. If we don't define it, we don't know what success looks like. So when you achieve that, so I would just encourage you to really define that. So for me, I would tell you that's a coherent ecosystem where parents really have the ability to choose that model that best fits the needs for their students. And then, of course, all of our publicly funded program, how do we ensure that they have clear performance standards and high quality? So, thank you.
I need my slides to come up, if that's okay. Thank you. So Representative Caldwell said less is more. Apparently we're on the same page because that's the title of my presentation is Less is More for you. So I'm Nicholeen Peck. I'm a representative in the House from Utah. And I actually want to just tell you, before I even jump into this, that I decided to get involved in policy and politics because of all the work that I was doing regarding family policy. So most people around the world actually know me because of my YouTube channels and podcasts and books and things related to parenting. So I have a whole parenting thing called Teaching Self-Government. And then I have a nonprofit that I work and I consult at the UN. I have status there where I work on family issues and women's issues and those types of things. And so things related to family are of like top importance to me. And that's why I started participating legislatively. And then people in my community asked me to run for office. And of course I was a homeschooler too, and those types of things. So family's of the utmost importance for me, which is why I even got into politics in the first place. So we're going to talk about less is more, trust-based education, but because I do think that's a key thing. Do we trust the parents? I always tell people that child was born to you, not to the school. Okay? That may be a revelation to some people, but that's the absolute truth. So if God trusts you, then I trust you. Like, that's how it goes for me, in my mind. Okay, so I think I missed something. This goes really fast. I gotta touch it quick. Okay, so just a little bit of a caveat from my life. Okay, so we went from there's little baking classes and Nights of Freedom co-op groups that I'm running for boys, teaching them character development and chivalry and all these different things. And then there's a Shakespeare play that I'm directing, right? And those types of things that we went through in our homeschool. And then to all of my children graduating from universities. My youngest one down there in the blue gown on the right-hand side, he is still in university, so he's the one that's not done yet. But those are my 4 children. I also did treatment foster care, by the way, for a lot of years for troubled teens. And if there's one thing that I can tell you, it's this. And that is that once you have the mindset of a homeschooler, you homeschool everyone. Like, it doesn't matter if they can't be homeschooled or not. You just homeschool them. And so that's what I do at my church when I serve there with youth groups. No matter where I'm at, I homeschool them because there's a mindset that comes with that. And when I listen to all the talk about microschools and the innovations that are happening in charters and those kinds of things, I'm like, you're homeschooling them, like, watch out, because that's really what's happened is homeschool, the parents, they decided this is really about us and our family and our house, and so then they changed the conversation. That's what happened, and that's why it's so incredibly powerful. Okay, so less government is more, so let's go through a little bit of Utah's history of trusting parents, because we have a history of that. All right, so in our code, in many places, here's just multiple. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see that top one. We have parental rights language in our code. I think that's a good foundation. It's a good start. Check your codes in your states if you want to make sure you have more choice in your state. Do you have language that supports the parents as the primary authority in the education of their children? because we declare it many, many times. And even you can see that bottom one, 53G 102043, that one says this is for education and what needs to be taught in education. It's a huge long list. I just put in a teeny little part there for you. But it says that even in the schools, we want to teach respect for parents, home, and family. Do you know how many states have code and standards in their education standards that never mention the parent-child relationship? That never mention success in the home. And that is their number one social group that they are born into. It is their top predictor for success. And in schools, we are often pulling children away from attachment to their parents. To me, that's incredibly concerning. And so in the state of Utah, we've put that as a really high priority. And over the last 15 years of working with legislators on family-friendly legislation, we've helped put these types of concepts back into the norm of society. Because right now, if you don't codify it, it's like it doesn't exist. Even though everyone has a family, it doesn't make sense. Okay, so one thing that we did that relates to parents' choice, and this is an easy little step, and that's why I'm entering it here, is so we used to have, kindergarten used to always be half day, like across the nation, right? And then across the nation, it changed to full day. Well, there were parents who were very disgruntled about this in our state, and they said, we want to have half day kindergarten again. And so we made a provision that said, you know what, you can. In fact, they're required to give you the same academic rigor in that half day that your child's there. If they only are going to be there half day than the rest. So what does the rest of the day turn out to be? Probably a lot of daycare. But anyway, they can have half day, and there are a lot of parents that are actually choosing that, which is fantastic. So this is a great little baby step if you don't have a ton of parents' choice. Just see if you can get that. Let's let parents choose on something, okay? One little thing. Okay, so less regulation is more. So let's talk about homeschools and micro schools and some of the stuff that we've done there. So we are a very homeschool-friendly state. In fact, we have a lot of legislators in our body who actually have homeschooled their children. There's something about homeschool, you guys, it empowers people. Okay? It frees people, it liberates people because they have to take the education of another group of people on their own shoulders with no support. Do you know the amount of study? Do you know the amount of books? Yeah, I went to college, I did all the things, but I didn't get a real education until I was a homeschool mom. Like at the end of the day, I'm never going to put on my bio where I went to college because that's just not impressive to me. What's impressive to me is the things that I've done with my family. Okay, so here's just an excerpt of a piece of legislation that I just ran this last year. So in the state of Utah for homeschoolers, we have no testing requirement for homeschool. That's huge because I know there's a lot of states that do require testing, but we never have in the state of Utah. We used to have an affidavit program. We now have no affidavits. So it used to be that they'd have to fill out an affidavit every year that says, you know, I plan on homeschooling my child this year, just so you know. We don't do that now. Now there's just an initial letter of intent which says that okay, I'm going to homeschool my child like for the first time, and then that's it. They don't have to do portfolios, nothing, and there's no background checks. So there's one warning I wanted to give in this presentation today, and that is this last year, we ended up taking a piece out of code that got in there kind of by accident that said that if you are going to homeschool, you can't be an abuser, which makes complete sense, okay, by the way. But there were a couple of districts who thought that that meant that they needed to background check all of their parents that were homeschoolers, and we're like, whoa, 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 freedom, and what about the parents having the, like, we're not going to suspect every parent of abuse, right? And so we had to withdraw that, and so that was this piece of legislation here, but here's my warning. So there is a group out there called the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. They are a wolf in sheep's clothing. They are not for homeschool. And they are from Maryland, and they started coming into our committees, virtual, like on Zoom, from Maryland and different places, saying how we need to test them more, and we need to check this, and what if they're not safe with their parents, and all these kinds of things. Putting this negative spin on homeschooling. They say they're for it in one statement, but if you look at their little Bill of Rights they are absolutely not. So just keep that in mind if they ever pop into your state. Not a friendly of parents' choice in education. Okay, so micro schools and learning pods in Utah. If you have 100 or less students, then you can be a micro school or a learning pod. They can be in homes, commercial businesses, parent-led, instructor-led. You can do them anywhere. And the school boards are prohibited from requiring any teaching credentials, inspections, testing, anything like that. So it's completely open and free in the state of Utah. So less regulation is more high quality education. So let's talk about Utah Fits All Scholarship Program. So this is how we brought in school choice legislation that brought some of the money back to the parents to put into private school or to homeschools. Okay, so here's a little bit of a timeline. There's been 3 bills at this point that we have worked on related to the Utah Fits All Scholarship. So HB 215 in 2023 started it. And actually, by the way, we started it the year before. And I think it's important for this group to know that in 2022, when we started coming up with legislation and people were writing it, the guy who was writing the legislation initially said, well, I'm education agnostic. Well, that kind of freaked me out. And I could see why this was going to be a problem, because I know you can say you're education agnostic, but if you don't understand the principles of education and who's really in charge, you got a problem. And he started writing in testing into this and all this kind of stuff, and I was like, this isn't going to work, because you're going to now hurt a whole bunch of people who already have more choice than what this is going to give them if you start putting in test. So anyway, the next year we came back with something better. We started small with 10,000 students, $80 million, and a lot of people on a wait list because a lot of people wanted this but couldn't get in. The siblings were allowed to be next in line. We opted for a simple portfolio instead of required testing. People can still test if they want to, but we don't require it, okay? And instead they just do simple portfolio, which they get to decide what that portfolio looks like and means. We disallowed any language that invited national or international oversight or intrusion. This is huge because in a lot of these pieces of legislation, it starts to bring in like this international and national language. And since I work at the UN, I'm like, ooh, don't put that in. Anyway, and so I was able to help with that a little bit. We allow religious curriculum to be purchased with funds. I know that's new for some states. Some of them don't allow that to happen, but we decided the whole child is the whole child is the whole child. Okay, and the parents know what they need to do for their child, and so religious is okay. And our bill became model legislation actually for many other states. And then immediately the teachers union sued the state. You know, why would they care? Why would they care? Because they're territorial, okay? Because they don't want the parents to be the expert on education. They want a degree to make the child belong to somebody else. I don't agree with that. Plus, there's money involved. Anyway, we made some adjustments the next year. We increased the funding a bit. And then we, this year, did further updates, and we'll talk a little bit about what those included. So initially, each child could get $8,000 per year, no matter if they were home-based education or whether they, and home-based education, by the way, could include those micro schools and stuff like that, okay? But the private school is private school. $8,000 was for everybody, but we realized that the home-based education actually didn't need that full amount of money. They didn't need the $8,000 per student, especially at the younger grades. And so we decreased the money for them, which maybe some of them were a little bit upset about, but this made it so that we could actually get more people in the scholarship program, because we continually have long lists of people on the wait list because we're phasing it in slowly over time. So public school students are not eligible. Again, no testing requirements. The expenses do have to be approved by a program manager. So we do have a program manager that oversees this program for us. There's a list of some eligible expenses. There's some prohibited expenses. So we did have a little bit of a problem before this year's legislation where people were buying things like lift tickets, because, you know, we're in Utah skiing, and like recreational equipment and stuff like that, and like buying a whole baby grand. Sorry, you know, that's not what this is for. And so we had to like clarify a little bit of what it was for. They can buy like computers every 3 years. There's lots of different things that they can get, and they can actually cover a lot of lessons and music instruction and those types of things as well. So it's super open for what those families can do. So then here we are, a little bit more, just pictures of the family and what life looked like. My favorite is the one of my son sleeping, because sometimes that happens during a homeschool day. Studying, oops, what happened? You know, there you go. But I wanted to just add one little final thought here as we're ending this, and that is that my focus has always been on the family and on the bonds. And parents' choice actually builds confidence. So we have a lot of parents right now who don't have confidence in their parenting. And I know because they come talk to me on a parenting level. and they'll say, what do I do about this problem, this problem, this problem? And usually a lot of those problems are school problems. And I'll say, well, you know that you have other options. What about the homeschool option? Have you thought of that? Maybe that'd be a better fit for your child. So we need to build confidence in the parents. If they don't get that confidence built, then they have a problem. If you tell them you have the choice, you can do this, that's one thing that can help build confidence in parents. And this actually leads to them analyzing more and building more skills and investing more and putting more effort into their children, which then helps them develop more confidence still, which we need to do. Because for me, this is about fixing homes and families in our society in general, not just giving people choice. So for society to thrive, the families and the relationships absolutely must thrive. And so when we give them more choice, these good choices spread. Anyway, that's my thoughts for you today, and hopefully you can get the big picture of what Utah thinks educational choice is actually about.
Oh, I can go now. My name is Bob Wittke. I'm from the great state of Wisconsin, where, as someone had told me, something I'm very proud of is that we were actually ground zero for school choice. We were one of the first states with school choice program in the city of Milwaukee. It was done in 1993. And so my words aren't about less is more or some other great thing like that. Mine is about survival and sustainability, because we are a heavy, especially in the urban areas. I was, interestingly enough, elected to our school board. Racine Unified is the 5th largest urban school district in the state. About a $300 million budget. I learned a lot of acronyms there, but it really opened up to things that you see that when you're a legislator that you should be aware of. So with that, I look at if I was going to start, and a lot of states are starting new with school choice or the last 5 years, I would look at two things. You have to put something in place that will survive any court battle that there is. If you look at our Constitution, the thing that people that don't like choice keep throwing at us is that we're supposed to only concentrate on public school. And it's loosely stated in our Constitution that we're supposed to provide that a public education. So that gets into, I guess, branding kids. You're either a choice kid or you're a public school kid. I'll give you funding on this side, but I don't want you to get funding on that side, no matter if one of the two is right. And if you, the other thing that I would recommend to people that make policy is that make sure that you're going to different school formats. I will go to any school that invites me there. When I was board president, I made it around to all 40 some odd schools that were in our district so that you can see firsthand what families struggle with, what kids struggle with, and potentially what's needed. I've gone to some very good charter schools we have. One of the things I recommended is what I heard in the session before, is that you find people in industry that are willing to invest. We have the owners of Husco have St. Augustine in the eastern side of Milwaukee, which is an excellent private choice school. The Ramirez family now has bought one of the colleges that went out of business. And when I went to listen to Gus Ramirez talk about his vision for the school, he said, we have learned from our school here, which is highly Hispanic, maybe 90%. He said, we are going to build a school and make sure that we take from every portion of the community so that kids learn how to get together across all ethnicities and that are not just in one or another. And I think that's what really helps keep choice going in our state. I have Diane Hendricks, who owns ABC Supply out in the western part of the state. She has gotten a business group together, and they've built something called the Lincoln Academy. A woman that was in the Milwaukee School District for 40 years runs it. It is an absolutely wonderful place to learn, and they are looking to get to, I would say, probably into middle school and then into high school. It's a somewhat of a slow process. And I'm currently working with one city charter school in Madison. It's run by a couple of gentlemen, and they've got an excellent staff. Their students are all minority, and they're doing some things that I think we need to take kind of inventory of. And they have asked for money from the state to develop what they call a demonstration school so that they can give other schools an idea of best practices. So it's kind of one of the innovative things that we might be able to get through the governor's office. I'm not going to get into what it's like trying to get legislation through in the state of Wisconsin. It's just so you know, I'm not one of the Act 10 heroes. We joke about this all the time. I've been in, this is my 4th term, so I've been in all 7 years under split government with a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature. And I could go on for days as to what that's like. And if you've seen in the news, our fine governor, who says it's the year of the kid, says he will not accept any federal money because we suffer from don't do anything that the federal government or Donald Trump wants to do, which is just unbelievable. But one city school is asking for about $4 million, and we're trying to tailor a bill so that they can do some things to pass on to others. One of the things that they do that I've been very impressed with is that we have issues in our public schools, in charter schools, and private schools, where there are kids that based on when they come into school, they just aren't ready for the grade level they're at. So if you go to their school, they have a couple of classrooms where they provide, they take kids, they understand through testing and interviewing with them where they're at. If they are not at grade level, they take them into that room and they are given instruction in the areas they need to get up to grade level. When they are ready, they're transitioned back out into a grade level class. The biggest thing that I take away from that is that they do not make a distinction that that's a separate classroom. We're all scholars in our school. They're just in a different room. I'm in this room, you're in that room. And I find that to be so effective, because when I went to visit and they had ambassadors there, Colleen was telling me that the 2 kids that took us around the previous year had been in those classrooms, and they were in 4th and 5th grade now. That's something that we don't take into consideration enough, is that how do we mitigate that? I was really interested in the last presentation where if I had, we have 429 school districts. If I could at least get 10 superintendents like the one I heard that focus purely on the child, we'd be further ahead. So we have had some things. So over the long term, we have been able to do some things. Recently, last session, we negotiated in the budget the largest increase in school choice funding, which you have to have funding to get your choice schools to survive. And we have a torrent of pushback against it, even though our program allows public school districts to get reimbursed for the cost of any school choice dollar that goes out their door. Well, that sounds great, except the problem is that that's all, the burden is put all on the property taxpayer. So you have public schools that are getting property tax dollars. We have voucher reimbursement that goes that route too. So it's a problem that there's no silver bullet to basically fix. So we have that. The one thing that I would like to work on that we haven't is that in 26-27, we have 3 programs. There's one in Milwaukee, one in Racine, and then there's one statewide. In the 26-27 school year, the caps will come off of the state program. So there will be no limitation anymore. And so we're fighting some pushback to that. And we get a lot of pushback that there's no accountability. And as I work with school choice advocates in our state, our choice schools have to be accredited to continue on in the state. And our Department of Public Instruction can stop funding at any moment. Now, they won't stop funding for Milwaukee that mishandles millions, but I had them almost close down a school of 190 autistic kids because an audit didn't come out the way they wanted. So I'm co-chair of the Joint Audit Committee. Most people in here would, if I put it up on the screen, would say it's like watching paint, but that's our oversight committee. And we find a lot of things under the surface that go on. We currently have an audit going on, Department of Public Instruction, to find out, we are actually auditing their audit process. What do you get in? How do you work with it? And I luckily had a Democratic colleague that stepped up and said, well, why don't you audit the choice program too? And I could see the guy from the DPI going, oh my God, don't say that. Because I know they treat each side separately. And I had school choice advocates call me up and say, how did you get them to audit both sides of that? And I said, I just let someone that likes to talk, like I do, just get their point in. But we are, and I've been to different conferences like this that talk about school choice, and I've asked, what are you going to do when maybe the results aren't exactly the way you want them? What are you going to do when someone says, I don't want to pay for that anymore? I said, we've survived 30 years of that and continue on in really difficult times. And if you're in the legislature, you got to have a little bit of a thick skin, and you got to think of the child. And that's how I do. I was on the education committee and higher ed committees for my first 3 sessions. And I asked this session, I said, please take me off. Committee hearings I'm wasting all my time here listening to a lot of the same rhetoric over and over. But, and so that's allowed me to work a little bit more on policy. And one of the things I'm looking at is to say, how do we, before 26, 27, how do we pull all of our administrative requirements together so that both public and choice are running under the same stream? I've had choice parents say that they've been, because they misspelled the street name, they were denied continuing on. And so if I showed you the hoops to get a child back in, once the DPI says, well, you misspelled the street, they must not be living in the same spot. So we deal with a lot of that. The last thing that I'll say is that, ironically, the largest choice program in Wisconsin is what we call open enrollment, and that's public school to public school. There are no limits. There's no income bracketing. You can do it any time of the year, whereas there are strict policies around school choice as to when you can enter your child or not. And I think one of the most interesting things that I had is I went to Rocket Ship, called Rocket Ship Charter School, and they wanted me to speak to some of the parents. Well, I don't speak Spanish. So I sat down with 15 Hispanic mothers, just like this. And they would ask me a question, and I would answer, and someone would interpret it. And when we got to a certain point, the interpreter looked over and goes, you can understand him just really well. And they all smiled and went, yeah. But it's getting that kind of feedback, because what was important about that is that all of those parents were in the Milwaukee public school system. They didn't go out because of Rocket Ship's great academic program. Their kids were bullied in the other school system, and nothing was done about it. So how do you look those people in the eye and say, well, there's nothing I can do? So that's why we continue to fight for school choice. We've got one of the things that I'm not sure if we'll deal with this session, but that we've started. It's called decoupling, whereas we will take and pull the funding for choice separately and take it out of GPR dollars rather than fund it through the property tax level. We couldn't get the governor to agree to it in this budget, but I believe it will come. And I think that's another way to survive school choice, is to take the funding issue out of it. So, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we open it up now for Q&A? Yeah, Senator Calatayud.
Sorry, before we jump into Q&A, I just wanted to add a couple of the components. I dipped my toe in, but I should have cannonballed. A couple components that we're looking at in Florida. We have just busted the door open on school choice. I mean, as Superintendent Carvalho mentioned during his time, he set the tone for what the public school districts are doing and should do as being competitive within the choice environment. I grew up in Miami-Dade County Public Schools for half of my education, and it's been dramatically different from when I was there versus what he's created. And districts across Florida have been trying to emulate choice environments where parents are dying to get their kids into a different or just options within their neighborhood traditional public schools. In Florida, we've also been working this past session to expand our Schools of Hope program, which is focused on high performance, the highest performing charters in the country, inviting them down to Florida, creating incentive structures for them to support the lowest performing students, the bottom 10%. And this past legislative session, I sponsored and we passed through the budget process a revision to the Schools of Hope model that we're hoping, and we actually heard announced yesterday, Success Academy from New York City is planning on launching their next iteration of their incredible Success Academy schools in my hometown in Miami. And so what we're focusing on in that kind of transformation of the Schools of Hope model, but I think philosophically, is the investment of legislative dollars of state appropriation for high impact to low-income children. Impact outcomes for low-income children. To me, that's the driver of why choice matters. That has to be the subgroup that is transformed by school choice. And so yesterday it was just announced that Success is coming to Miami, and we see matching philanthropic effort to the state's investment and excitement of $50 million from Mr. Ken Griffin as a seed funding for the future of that program. It's not just about money, though. It's about transformational models of co-location. So Florida's not really had two schools within one school. What we'll see with the Success model, but the Schools of Hope model generally, is that high-performing charters will now have the opportunity to co-locate within 50% unoccupied schools that already have a traditional public school within them. And that's one of the new things we have going on in Florida. I think also incredibly important, this past legislative session, we created the opportunity for charter schools to have some sort of zoning preemptions for the new movement of additional schools to pop up without enormously cumbersome processes of local, municipal, county, million-dollar lobbying efforts. We want this next year to try to figure out what is a version of that we can do for micro schools and public and private schools, which are really supercharged by the universal voucher environment in Florida. I also want to mention, I'm looking a lot at New Mexico and their incredibly visionary process of expanding the universal voucher to birth. I think that's the future of the voucher or scholarship system. And I think for too long, education leaders in the legislature have not prioritized funding in the birth through 20 system as a continuum. And so the future of changing and emerging education models is the birth through 20 focus and the investment strategy. So those are a couple of things happening in Florida. Those are some of the things I want to happen in Florida. And I think they're important for you to know. We're trying to find all these different ways to make space for all of our incredible education modalities while not taking up too much of the oxygen with one singular group.
All right, thank you. Quick question. I'm curious to know, how are you thinking about accountability for private school choice programs? We had an interesting question raised at our keynote address last night where an argument was made that district-run public schools are academically underperforming, and so we need private school choice. And so what followed from that was, well, then should we be holding private school choice programs accountable for academic outcomes? How are you thinking about this?
Are you talking to anyone in particular?
Just the panel, whoever wants to jump in.
Okay, go ahead.
I think my opinion is yes. Parents need to have a normative standard to understand the value of the program that they're putting their child in. I think That's my opinion. And at the end of the day, between where we're at in the United States versus where we need to go at the state level to create that buy-in is a different question. But I think it's important for consumers to have apples to apples information on the choices that we're providing and we're making investments in our education systems.
And I would say no, because just, we got to have a mix. But I would say no, because when a parent decides to do a private school, they really go and they tour these private schools. They rigorously look at all kinds of things. They ask things. They go and talk to the people that they know that are also attending that private school. They know quite a bit about it. And sometimes they've been to the private school themselves. I really don't think that we don't trust the parent's judgment on that. So I'm going to always default to the parent knows, and that's fine. And it doesn't matter if the money is going to a private school or to a micro school or to anything else. The parent is the one that needs to govern that education, because that's who's in charge of the child. And if we start doing too much oversight, we're saying that we don't trust the parent's actual choice. Because sometimes a parent may choose to have someone mentor their child or teach their child that is not even a graduated teacher. They might be somebody who just developed a huge business but never went to college. I mean, I think a lot of people would say, maybe that Bill Gates could mentor their child, or, if we go on the other end of the spectrum, that Charlie Kirk could mentor their child. Both of them never went to college, right? So, I mean, I think that we're kind of past that in our society, and so I don't know.
I take exception, Bill Gates went to Harvard.
For a minute, that's right.
But he dropped out.
That's right. He dropped out. I think good point. I think Charlie Kirk kind of did something slightly similar. Yeah. Anyway, point is, as a person who actually homeschooled my children and made that leap and taught in private academies and stuff like that, I actually would be picking a mentor based on character qualifications way more than on some sort of state academic standard.
Dan, if I can, I would just say that I think our private schools actually have the ultimate accountability, because you have people that get to vote with their feet and their pocketbook. And we get that question a lot in Oklahoma, because we don't put our private schools on the same accountability system. But I would say it depends on your definition of accountability. I think the accountability systems that we have for most of our public schools is faux accountability. It is governmental accountability. I attribute it, it's kind of like the health department with restaurants. When the health department comes in, they're going to look at grease traps and making sure that food is properly refrigerated and surfaces are clean. They don't actually measure the quality of the food, the quality of the service, and if the people are going there are actually satisfied with what they're doing. The decision on whether a restaurant is ultimately successful is if people continue to go there. And if they don't provide the services they need, they're going to go somewhere else because they have a choice and they take their dollars with them. That's what real accountability looks like. That's what our private schools have. And so if we want to empower that, if we really want true accountability, I'd love that system across the board, because I think there's kind of maybe a mixture in there, and it really just gets back to what does accountability look like and how do you really define that?
So this is like, all I would say is that's a great talking point. I hear this all the time. So my approach to that would be, explain it to me. What do you mean about accountability? Because in many cases, those that preach that mantra have no clue what the accountability is at the state level. Because I can pull the statute out and show them, well, these are the things that are going on. They've got to prove that their students are there every year. They have to go through audits that public schools just merely turn in. And so I find that to be more of a talking point, and one that I don't believe is answered when you ask somebody, have you taken a look at, and what does that mean? Do I believe in accountability? Yes. But there is one issue that we have, and that is, what if I have a Catholic private school with an enrollment of 500 that gets 15 choice students? What kind of accountability is that going to be? Because they want full governmental control over that 500-student school with only 15 choice kids in it. That's, if you want to have a discussion around this, that's fine. If there are things that we should be doing, I'm all for it. But then it should be on both sides and not just one.
I think we have time for just one question. So, yeah, how about this gentleman right here?
I'd like to just build on that. Thank you. And again, like, this is more like intellectually, I appreciate the debate, but we're moving towards a free market model, right? And we heard some of that last night. Like, let's open up the competition. We've done that around pension. So there's very few defined benefit plans today. It's 401k. We've done that with healthcare. We all pick our plans. When you go to pick a 401k, pick mutual funds. When you go pick your healthcare plan, there are ways to make comparisons around your expense fees, around performance, things like that. I would imagine it's inevitable that if public dollars will flow into this more fragmented education space, as consumers, we would want to be able to make those comparisons. So I hear your pushback, because I think we do need innovation. We do need people who can act with courage. But it seems a little naive, and that might be too strong a word, to think that we can take the dollars from the public sector and not also provide consumers with the information they need to make informed decisions.
Okay, I'll take that. I mean, somebody else can add too, but I think you're comparing mutual funds and stuff like that to education. I read a book called A Market-Based Education years ago. It's an old little thing. Back when I was a homeschooler, and I was like, there's a lot of truth to this. But I think we really have to ask ourselves, at least I ask myself, is it a market? Because the way we discuss it with dollars and tax dollars and stuff like that, it sounds like a market. But as a person who's been in it, in my home, I don't see it as a market. I see it as a role that adults play in society, that parents have in society. Is it a market or is it a role? Is there a relationship that's there? Because that's a little bit different than the relationship that I have with my, investment guide. I feel like it's a role, and so I don't think there's anything naive about it at all. I think it's a good stewardship.
So I respect what you're saying, but the issue I have is, will you really want to compare apples to apples? Because that's not going on right now. Okay? So if the public schools want to come forward and compare to what choice schools are doing, I have no problem with that. If someone can come to me and say, this is the accountability that I want and it makes sense on both sides of the fence, I have no problem with that at all. And I'll work with our bill drafters to write the laws. The problem I have is that one of the things that everyone has talked about with choice is said competition is going to make our entire education system better. And I can tell you from 30 years plus, the years that I've spent, it has not. Public schools have not responded. They have just come and said, legislature, fix this, don't give money, it's got to be accountability, it's got to be something else. But if you go to these choice schools, there's a school that I go to, Hope Christian, that's in Racine. 90% from the inner city of Racine. No religious background at all. But they teach Christian values, they have mass every day, and I asked the question, I said, so when parents come here from the inner city and they don't have this, and they're told that this is how the school operates, do they say, okay, I'll just go back to where I was? The answer is no, because some of that is not being provided in the family structures that I see in my state. So why can't that be a choice for kids to be able to flourish in that environment? But nobody wants to be honest about, are we comparing apples to apples? It's, I'll compare maybe pears to, let's say, cherries over here. Because one of the things that I've asked on the floor of our assembly, I've asked for 7 years, we get this mantra that says you got to fully fund public education. So I've said, come to my office and explain to me what that means. How many people do you think have come through my door? 0. And that's 7 years. And I've started to say it on the floor now, so all the new people understand that I'm kind of a nice guy, would love to talk to you about it. I asked a public school teacher the same thing when we had some open houses. She looked at me and said, you should know. I said, I've got a budget of close to $100 billion that we have to fund corrections. Education is the top one. We got university system, and then our M&A, our medical assistant stuff has gone through the roof. So I said, I don't look at it specifically. I'm looking at you. You're in front of the kids every day. If I'm not doing something right, please tell me. Because once again, we will look at how do we make that right. Because I believe we should focus on the kids and not on the adults.
Okay, I do think we have to wrap up, but I just want to thank our busy legislators for the panel this morning.